Hello, welcome to Oceanic Oracle. My name is Ari and today we're going through my May wrap-up. So, May has been a bit of a busy month for me. I've had a lot of work to do as well as just life stuff that's going on. But I have managed to read all the books, well, most of the books that I said I was going to. I did change one. I was allowed to because my previous cards allow me to swap because I have two of my green card set. As you can see, when you have two cards, you can swap. I swapped a book because I just couldn't finish one. So I am just going to go through my list of books. Like, I've read the 10 books for the cards that I drew, which is the most important thing, obviously, because this is my TBR game. But I've also read a few extra, and feel free to stick around to listen to me talk about them. I was a bit bad at the start of the month. To be fair, I was finishing off a series that I was reading at the end of April, which I didn't talk about because I filmed my wrap-ups like the last week of April. I can finish books later, but I was finishing off the Smythe-Smith Quartet. I started the month reading The Secrets of Richard Kenworthy. This is a historical romance. It's a light-hearted book. It's relatively slow. It was fun. It was a fun read, let's put it that way. This is the fourth and final book in the Smythe-Smith Quartet, and this follows Iris Smythe-Smith. She's a part of the Bouquet branch of the Smythe-Smith family. So if you don't know, the Smythe-Smiths in the Bridgeton series are a large group, like are a large family with lots and lots of cousins. Like every year, all the oldest unmarried women have to get together and perform a Smythe-Smith quartet. And everyone, including the people who are a part of the quartet, hate it. I mean, all except for like people who are convinced they have musical talent. But yes, so the Smythe-Smiths are known for putting on an annual musicale and not being very good at it. Let's put it that way. Iris is the last member of this group, that the original quartet who performed in the first book. But Iris is playing the cello. Iris is the, I guess if you've read Romancing Mr Bridgeton, which is my yellow book at the bottom of the A there, she's the one in the quartet who looks upset and actively looks like she doesn't want to be there because she knows that they're awful. She gets so embarrassed having to perform to all these people. Iris just really doesn't like it. But at the Smythe-Smith musicale, there's a man in the crowd. Sir Richard Kenworthy is in the crowd. He's come down to London from Yorkshire and he is looking for a wife, or he's looking for someone to get married to him in 2 weeks because he has something that's going on up in Yorkshire that he won't disclose until 75% of the way through the book. So you have to wait to see what goes on with him and why he's looking to find a bride so quickly. But as soon as he sets his eyes on Iris, he knows that she is going to be the one. She's the one. He isn't expecting to fall in love with her. He just needs someone to get married to him really quick. He needs someone understanding, and he thinks that Iris is the perfect candidate for that. So they start courting quite quickly. Iris actually knows that there's something going on and she just can't tell. In this sense, Iris is like the reader. She knows that there's something going on. I mean, we know there's something going on because we get dual perspective, but Iris is actually quite like observant in that aspect, and she knows that there's something going on. She acknowledges that this sort of behavior is weird on their wedding night. The story is about deception, intuition, and perseverance, because there's lots of stuff in here that Iris has to persevere, as well as like Sir Richard. He's quite crafty. He's really crafty, and I really enjoyed it because it was a bit different to what I've come to expect from Julia Quinn's writing and Julia Quinn's characters. I think if you're interested in historical romance, just keep in mind that this book isn't very diverse. You also don't really get much LGBT representation. It's very white. That's why I like the Bridgeton show. This was a really nice book. I was crying at the end of this because of the actual secret that went on. Fucking heartbreaking, but you have to read the book to figure out. I recommend this series if you like Julia Quinn, if you like Bridgerton, and you're a fan of the historical fiction genre. Just keep in mind it's not very diverse, be that race-wise or LGBTQ-wise. So that was a book that I read outside of my cards. So let's get on to the first book that I read for my cards. There was This Woven Kingdom by Tabra Marthy, and I read this book for the A Rose by Any Other Name card, which was to read a fantasy romance. This fit, although quite loosely. I was expecting it to be much more romance heavy than it was, but it wasn't. So this is a fantasy book. It is quite adventurous. It can be dark, and it was tense. It was a medium paced book. It didn't happen too quickly. It also wasn't too slow. So if you like medium paced books that are fantasy, I think you'd like this one. So I gave this book 5 stars. I was actually quite surprised, and I really enjoyed this aspect. It's a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy. It draws on Jinn warriors and that sort of mythos. It was really interesting because this is a book about Jinn living in a world where everyone is set against them. Like, even though they have been allowed to live without being like completely killed off. Our main character is Aliza, and she is Jinn. She is working in a household of wealthy people in the capital city. Aliza gets worked to the bone because she is Jinn, and surprise, Aliza is actually the long forgotten Jinn queen. She's been reincarnated. Aliza is always cold, like her blood runs cold. She's worked to the bone. She hardly gets any time to rest. In this story, the Jinn, they don't require much sleep, they don't require much food, and it just sounds like really bad it's slave labor basically, and she gets paid practically nothing. She's working on trial. One day she's actually out delivering a dress, trying to make some more money, and she gets attacked in the streets, and this attack draws the attention of our other main character, Prince Cameron. So Cameron is the prince. He's just returned from war, and the first time that he sees Aliza is after this attack. He suspects something's off about her. He suspects that she's a spy for the warring countries. He wants her to get investigated. So he finds a bit of evidence, takes it back to the palace, and practically ruins Aliza's life. From the events that happen after he brings the evidence to the palace, Cameron starts to view the world a bit differently, particularly his grandfather, who is the active king, who is the current ruler of this land. After observing Aliza in her natural habitat, he stumbles upon her quite a lot, and Cameron starts to fall in love with her. The king is out for Aliza's head because she's a part of a great prophecy, and Cameron can't do anything about it. He has to make up his mind. Is he just going to sit back and let his grandfather kill this innocent girl who hasn't done anything, or is he going to try and stop it? And this is the first book of a new series. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. This was just really interesting to me. I think if you're looking for a new sort of YA fantasy with romantic elements, This Woven Kingdom definitely works. Tabra Marthy's writing was just great for me. I really enjoyed the characters. I liked the atmosphere. The plot was intriguing, but there were times where it was a bit thin. I'm more of a character-driven reader anyway, so character is usually what draws my eye the most in books. I was intrigued and I enjoyed it. So if you're looking for a new YA fantasy, if you're looking for something a bit different than your typical Western fantasies, definitely check out This Woven Kingdom. It's fantastic. The next book that I read in May was The Language of Thorns, Midnight Tales and Dangerous Magic. I read this book for my anticipated read card, which is to read an anticipated book. I got this for Christmas from one of my sisters, and I will say I enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. I enjoy reading from the Grishaverse. I mean, you can see the King of Scars duologies there. I have my Six of Crows duology here, and behind me I have my mix of I have my Shadow and Bones books. So this is a sort of like companion piece like to the story. It's just like extra lore. The stories that are told in here, because this is a collection of short stories, are all myths that relate to different areas in the Grishaverse, so different countries that you go to in the various books in the series. If I didn't enjoy the Grishaverse, I wouldn't have enjoyed this as much. I don't think you can read this as a standalone because it can get a bit confusing. Particularly, I believe that this book sort of assumes that you have prior knowledge, so you at least have to have read one of the books in the series, so at least probably Shadow and Bone. I enjoyed these because they're sort of like dark fairy tales, sort of like the Brothers Grimm, like the actual fairy tales from the Brothers Grimm, as well as like Hans Christian Andersen, not the sort of like not the Disneyfied versions, because those tend to be sort of more catered more towards happily ever afters. All these stories do have lessons, which is what you would expect with fairy tales. They're not as prevalent as you tend to see in fairy tales, which are essentially sort of like there to educate children. But I like them for what they were. Some of these were really interesting. The artwork in this book, can you see that? Like the borders that go completely around all of these stories are just beautiful. So another one. If you like the Grishaverse, I think you'll enjoy this book, but I don't think it's necessary as a like book you have to read. Like you don't have to go and buy this and read this in order to understand the characters even more in the books. It's just like a companion piece for some people, for people who enjoy reading about the Grishaverse and want to explore it more. So yeah, 4 stars, nice book. Moving on. After I finished The Language of Thorns, I went and picked up Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I actually listened to this. This book fits into the contemporary LGBTQIA+ genre as well as literary fiction, and I read this book for my literary fiction card. It was really emotional and really like reflective. This book is about people in Britain, and it's quite reflective in that aspect because you actually look at the number of different cultures that are present in the UK. Like if you want a book that portrays Britain as it actually is, as a multicultural place, this is definitely a book that you should pick up and you should read. It's a book about people of all backgrounds, which is like one of the most important things that we need to read. It's a book about people of multiple different backgrounds, and it's fantastic. I've grown up in Asia. I've grown up in like multicultural cities, and I think the topics and the experiences that are portrayed in this book felt real. In each chapter, you get 3 different perspectives, and all these characters are linked, which is nice because obviously you're telling a story to end up at a big end point at the end. Each character shines in their own right, so you get experiences from like university students compared to like older adults, like grandparents and that sort of stuff, and it just gives you a snippet into like the lives of all these different people and their backgrounds and their lived experience. It does a fantastic job in portraying Britain and the United Kingdom in a way that it actually is. I think Bernardine Evaristo did a fantastic job in telling the story, and if you're looking for a book with interesting characters and real lived experiences from people, definitely pick this up. It felt so real. I gave this 4 stars. Fantastic. The next book that I read in May was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. I read this for my disabled / neurodivergent representation card. Helen Huang is an autistic author, and this book follows Stella, who is autistic, and it's a romance, which makes it really fun. It's a contemporary romance book. So this book is quite emotional, but it's also really light-hearted. And this was quite medium paced. So this is, I believe, my 3rd time rereading The Kiss Quotient. I read this for the first time in March last year, and this is my 3rd time rereading it. It's one of my favourite romances, and I think it just highlights that romance is for everyone. And if you're looking for a smut-filled, like spicy romance, you should definitely check this out. In this book, we follow Stella, who is an autistic econometrician. Stella's parents have told her, like in the first chapter, they tell her, We want grandchildren. And this really stresses Stella out because grandchildren means marriage, and marriage means dating, and dating means sex. And Stella doesn't like sex. After she has this conversation with her parents, she goes off to work and bumps into one of her co-workers who her parents recommend as like, perfect husband material. And he tells her that she probably doesn't enjoy romantic relationships and sex because she isn't good at it, and the only way to make it good for other people is for her to get good at it. This pushes her in the direction of escorting, and that's where we get introduced to Michael, our main male lead. Michael Larson, he's escorting because he needs to pay his mother's medical bills, and that's the main reason he went into escorting in the first place, because he has a lot of bills to pay. He's an extremely compassionate person. Michael's fantastic. He is really compassionate, and he actually goes and helps Stella. He actually offers a solution to the issues that she's going through. Like, Stella proposes that they start having like sex lessons and then moving on to lessons on how to like be in a romantic relationship, and he agrees, and he agrees to help her along the way. The two of them get close, and eventually, like, obviously they end up falling for each other. It's a romance book. What did you expect? I love this romance. I think it's a book that showcases that obviously romance is for everyone, which is like one of the most important things that we need in romance. We need romance books for everyone. I think Helen Huang did a fantastic job. I love her writing. Her writing is absolutely stunning. I can't sing the praises enough. I absolutely like Helen Huang. Boy, with her releases, it's an instant buy for me. So I'm looking forward to seeing what she comes out with next. With this reread, this book still got 5 stars. So there we go. The characters and atmosphere are great, and I loved it. So moving on. The next book, well, instead of doing the logical decision and going and picking up the next book in the series, I went and picked up Tales from Moomin Valley, and this was for my translated fiction card. If you don't know, I am half Finnish, so in my family, Moomin Troll was a big thing for us when we were younger, listening to the stories. Like, I can still remember having the Finn Family Moomin Troll cassette tape, if you remember what those are. That's one of my strongest memories that I have from childhood, is listening to that with my sisters and falling asleep. But this is I believe it's the 7th book in the Finn Family Moomin Troll series, and this is actually a collection of short stories that focus on multiple different characters throughout the books. I will always hold Moomin Troll and the characters from like Moomin Valley close to my heart, because I've grown up listening to them and I'm a Finn, so I have that relationship with it. Tove Jansson writes really well. Like, she writes really poetically, like, about these characters and about the journeys that they go on, and they're really joyful and joyous. Like, Tove Jansson just has a way with words. It just makes her stories poetic, and they never fail. They never fail to charm me. They're really lyrical. So one of these stories follows the Hattie Fatners. I mean, as you can see there, I have the Hattie Fatners on one of my throw pillows. The stories add depth to the characters that I already know. The characters get developed a bit more, and that's what I like about books. So I enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. It's a children's classic. It was emotional, it was joyful, and it's medium paced because there are lots of different stories in here. So if you like reading children's literature and you're looking for something that, I don't know, maybe you haven't read, check out Tales from Moomin Valley. Maybe you'll get introduced to a new type of fiction. If you want a piece of Finnish writing, definitely check out the Moomin Troll series. But it's just great and I love it. So 4 stars. And moving on. Now on to the next book in the Kiss Quotient series, or should I say the last book, The Heart Principle. And I read this for BIPOC representation, and this was fantastic. So obviously this is a contemporary romance book. It was emotional, hopeful, and this is medium paced. This book was so impactful. I was crying at the end. Our main character, Anna, she is a violinist who had a video that went viral, and she has spent the whole time of the last year trying to recreate that virality. The stuff that Anna goes through in here, I was crying. Like, I'm an emotional person, but I was bawling my eyes out. According to Helen Huang's author's note at the back, this book actually mirrors her life the most accurately out of the 3 books in the series. So the Kiss Quotient, the Brightess, and the Heart Principle. This book mirrors her life the most. Quite a lot of the reason for this is that this book actually focuses a large proportion on autistic burnout and the impact that it has on the autistic person. And it made me feel really emotional. The topic of masking and of the inadequate diagnosis of women with autism gets talked about a lot. While this book is primarily a romance between Anna and Quan is such a nice guy, and he really helps Anna in her understanding of being diagnosed as autistic. As someone who studied science and who has studied like the way that our medicine gets created, most of the time everything in this world is made for men. Most of the work done focuses on men and the impact it has on them, so that also translates to psychologically. So most of the time women with autism or presenting people with autism don't get diagnosed, and this is such a big topic, especially in this book, alongside autistic burnout, because Anna is going through, like, she's really feeling the effects of autistic burnout and everything that amounts to, and it just made me so emotional. The romance in this book between Quan and Anna, it's so beautiful. It's like, it's raw. Quan has just come back from being treated for testicular cancer, which is again a big topic that needs to be talked about. Like, testicular cancer is the cancer that affects most young men. Quan is so understanding, again, so compassionate. I was crying at the end, and I think if you're looking for a new emotional romance, like, pick this up. I was just crying and I loved it, so 5 stars. I know there are mixed reviews, I get that, but I just really loved it. I loved Helen Huang's writing, and I think it was an absolutely stunning book. 5 stars. The next book that I read in May was Wailing. This is classed as a fantasy, but it has a romantic subplot, so I guess romance can be thrown in there as well. It's quite an adventurous story, and it's like a medium-paced story. So I read this book for my Guide Me card, which is to read a book with a map. And let me just show you the map. There we go, there's the map. I found it quite intense when I started reading it, which was like a bit jarring, but I grew to really enjoy the plot, and I really enjoyed the high stakes that were involved. I liked reading about our main character. Our main character is Katza. In this world, certain people have graces, and these graces are things that they're good at. It can be fighting, it could be swimming, it could be sewing. The way that people can tell is that the 2 eyes are different. So when they're young, they may be a different eye color altogether. So let's say they were hazel eyes when they were born, but when their grace takes place, one of their eyes turns green and one of their eyes turns blue, and that is the mark of someone who's graced in this world. So the way that Katza's grace is presented, and the way that people around her view her, as well as how she herself views herself, the way that she was treated seemed believable. Katza has like the grace of death, like she is able to, like, she can kill people. Her grace is the grace of death. Aside from Katza, I actually really enjoyed the romantic subplot that formed. The romantic aspects weren't too in your face all the time, like you knew that something was coming, but it's not a fancy romance in the sense of like From Blood and Ash is a fancy romance, if that makes sense. This is much more like high level YA fantasy. I liked the main male character who goes on a journey with Katza, Prince Po, I should say. He was such a great character. He was so nice, and it was nice to see someone treat Katza without being like completely scared of her, and it was just really nice and beautiful. I think if you're looking for a new YA high fantasy romance series, definitely check this out. I think this is definitely a YA series, although the characters definitely age quite a bit throughout it. I'm looking forward to seeing where this story goes. I think this is definitely a good option if you're looking to read like true YA fantasy. I like the main characters, I think the world building was great, and I liked the magic system. At times the writing was a bit like much, I will say. It could be a bit intense, but I understand that it's a stylistic choice. The plot drew me in. There were times where my intrigue sort of waned, but that was more to do with the writing than what was going on in the plot. The characters, I think, made logical decisions, although to be fair, I don't go around carrying a sword and going out and fighting people, so there's that. And overall, I enjoyed it. I gave this 4 stars. The next book that I read in May was for my Aurora Rang Through the Air card, which is a book featuring a magical beast. And for this card, I read The Serpent Shadow. Now, Serpent Shadow, this is a reread. I read the Kane Chronicles when they first came out. I think this one was published in 2012, so it's been a long time since I picked this up. Yeah, this came out in 2012. It's been a long time since I picked these up, but I really enjoyed my reread. Obviously, I read them when I was like a teenager. I really enjoyed this. If you want to read a book about Egyptian mythology and like a middle grade book with really like such a diverse set of characters, Rick Riordan's writing works for me. I have said this before, I'll say it again. Rick Riordan's writing is just like, honestly, his writing always manages to drag me into books, and like it doesn't matter what they're a part of, what series I'm reading, albeit like it could be the Percy Jackson series, it could be like Heroes of Olympus, it could be Magnus Chase, Kane Chronicles, everything just like his writing just always manages to pull me in and keep me engaged. And for me, as someone who is dyslexic, his writing just works for me. It's the big climax, like it's the 3rd act of the trilogy. So you have the big fight that goes on. I really enjoy the characters and the way that they've been developed, and what you get at the end of the book. You can really see a clear difference compared to the first book, The Red Pyramid and The Serpent Shadow. If you want a fun middle grade mythology retelling, like you definitely like this series. You have the big fight with Apophis and doesn't disappoint. You have the giant battle scene at the end of it, and then you also have cameos from characters from the Heroes of Olympus book who actually turn up in this one. People who haven't read the Heroes of Olympus series might not understand, well, won't know. If you're looking for a fun Egyptian mythology retelling with magical realism, definitely check out the Kane Chronicles. I don't really want to spoil what goes on in the end of this. If you're looking for something different from Greek mythology, Roman mythology, definitely check out this series. The next book I read in May was Romancing Mr Bridgeton. So this was the book that I swapped. I read Romancing Mr Bridgeton for my long ago card, which is to read a book classed as historical fiction. Technically not too long ago, albeit the Bridgeton series takes place in the 1800s, but still a good book nonetheless. I really enjoy this book and the series. I read this book because it was announced that Colin and Penelope will be the main focus for the next season of Bridgeton, and this is like, it's the most exciting for me. I love Colin and Penelope's relationship and the way that their characters are in the show. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what actually happens. When this was first announced, I just couldn't stop smiling. You can ask my cousin. I was so overwhelmed, and I was so happy, and I absolutely loved it. So I went and picked this up because the other book that I did have for this card was it A Jewel in the Crown, and I found that a bit challenging for me. I'm going to try reading it another time, or I'm actually going to be trying reading chapters slowly, so you might see my final review maybe not next month, or maybe the month after, because their chapters are really long and it takes a lot of mental effort for me. So I read this instead. Loved it, gave it 5 stars. I've already talked about it before. I love the characters, I like the atmosphere, I like the romantic relationship, and I'm here for the plus size representation that's going to be in the show, so sign me up. I love Colin. Colin is my favourite Bridgeton brother, particularly in the books. I'm just excited. So moving on. The next book that I read in May was The Battle of the Labyrinth, and I read this for The Wind It's Calling, which is to read a book featuring elemental magic. Percy is the son of Poseidon. as I've already talked about, so he can control water, so technically a form of elemental magic. This book is setting up the final book in the series, which is The Last Olympian here, and you can feel that we're going towards like the big battle, which is what the Last Olympian is about. Obviously there is a battle that goes on in here because it's called the Battle of the Labyrinth. The Labyrinth is a major part in this book. I gave this 5 stars. It's magical realism, Greek mythology, adventurous, tense, relatively fast-paced. This series holds a special place for me in my heart, and I really enjoy my rereads of it. I really like Annabeth and her journey that she goes on in this book, as well as the like friendships. Percy is a bit of a seaweed brain. Some girl trouble that goes on, as well as like end of the world trouble that's being set up. Percy turns 15 at the end of this book, and getting close. I love this series. I love this book. As I've already gone on about Rick Riordan's writing, you know, I like his writing. The way that the final battle gets set up is fantastic. I mean, if you're interested in Greek mythology and you haven't read Percy Jackson and the Olympians, definitely give the series a try. I don't really want to spoil anything because I know some people might not have read it, but it's a fantastic book. Writing's great, plot is fantastic, love the characters, love the atmosphere. Intrigued, logical, and the enjoyment was great. So there we go. The last physical book that I picked up in May was Death in the Dordogne, as I've been told that it's actually pronounced Dordogne. I don't speak French. This is the book that I read for my picking a book out of my jar and trying a chapter. This was actually quite fun and light-hearted for a mystery book and for like a crime book, I guess. So this follows Bruno, who is the chief of police in Saint-Denis, and the story follows him and some people from the Police Nationale, which is the national police service, I believe, in France, investigating the death of this man, Hamid al-Bakar, who has been found dead. They find that there's a connection with World War II and the history of that region. The history about the region is really drawn upon, and it's actually a region and a bit of history that I don't know much about. I do know my World War II history, but I do not know like specific regional histories in regards to like provinces in France. It's a book with lots of twists and turns, and the plot twist at the end I did not expect. So there we go. If you're looking for a mystery book which is a bit light-hearted, because there's quite a lot of this book is actually spent on like trying to outwit the EU and their hygiene stuff, definitely check this book out. I think it's just really interesting, and I think lots of people like it. That was fun. And moving on to the last 2 books that I read, and these are both electronic. I read them on my Kindle. The first one is a book that I've been waiting to read for a while, and it is Under One Roof. This is a novella by Ali Hazelwood. Ali Hazelwood wrote The Love Hypothesis, which came out last year. This was one of my favourite books of 2021. Obviously, I went out and picked up her latest release. This is a novella, and I really enjoyed it. There's demisexual representation, which I thought was fantastic. I really enjoy reading about women in STEM and the stuff that goes on, because as I've talked about this before, I am a woman who works in STEM, and the stuff that actually gets discussed regarding the way that women get treated. Whilst people say they're not misogynists, they tend to treat women differently compared with male co-workers, and that really affects the way that teams run. Our main character in this book, Mara, is working for the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, and she has just moved into this house which she co-owns with her late professor's nephew, and her late professor's nephew actually works for a a fossil fuels company of all things, and you can tell that they don't really get on from the get-go, but that's what makes their romance so much fun. Keep in mind, this is a novella. It's not like a particularly smutty novella. It's like you have the like build up, and then in the last chapter, so this novella is only 121 pages long. The build up all goes to the final chapter where you have the smut, but I really enjoyed the way it's set up. So the first chapter takes place in the present day, and then you read about the relationship building up to where you are essentially at the beginning of the book. It's fantastic. I like Ali Hazelwood's writing. I gave this 5 stars. Give me more women in STEM in romance, please. I eat up. So. And finally, the book that I just finished, well, technically I finished yesterday, is A Brush with Love, which was again one of my anticipated reads for this year. A Brush with Love is about it's about a dentist, or technically dentist students, 2 dentist students actually. Our main character Harper, she is a 4th year dental student in the in a postgraduate program. I will warn you going into this book is great for anxiety representation. It goes into detail as to feelings regarding panic attacks and like sexism and internal and external ableism. So if that sort of stuff triggers you, just know that before going into it. I really enjoyed it, but there were times where I had to put the book down purely based on the anxiousness. I think there should be romance books about everyone. This book was a really good representation of anxiety and how it can affect people, as well as like how it can affect relationships. Because this book goes into detail as to what someone who has anxiety and who has been diagnosed with chronic panic attacks triggered by post-traumatic stress. This book really talks about that and the representation, as well as talking about, again, more sexism for women who work in medical fields as well as like other fields in STEM, but purely based on the dentistry field. I also really enjoyed the romance. I think Dan was a great character. It's actually quite nice because in this book Dan falls first, and obviously you get the 2 perspectives, which I like in my romance novels. It's one of the things that I actually tend to lean more towards when I'm reading. He's just really sweet. He also has his own struggles in his life. Harper and Dan sort of meet at a pivotal time for both of them. It's really, really important that we share these stories, and I think this is a great romance novel for that representation. But obviously keep in mind that you may need to take breaks, or if you get triggered by like descriptions of panic attacks, sexism and like ableism, keep that in mind. If you get triggered by those, maybe this isn't a book for you. I enjoyed this. I gave this 4.5 stars, and it was a lot, but it was a good book. So that's it. Those are all the books that I read in May. They're a lot, but it was a good reading month, despite how busy I was. So much stuff to go through. My plans for my TBR game, because I'm going to go and film that after this. I hope you like my June TBR, because I'm going to have a lot of fun sort of trying to create it and doing things. I am very excited for June because I'm taking part in Whateverathon, or Whatever You Want-a-thon, which was created by Book Browsing Blogs. I took part in this last year before I even started my YouTube channel, and now it's happening again in June, and I'm very excited. Last year I read 30 books in a month. I don't think I'll read as many books this time round, but I do have other things to do, mainly focusing on my moving. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe if you want more bookish content. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, depending on when you're watching this. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys!